Hey everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to Cinefessions, where we talk all things media. And welcome to episode 2 of Shelf Space, where I take a look at 3 items in my physical media collection, and I ask the question, are these worth the shelf space or not? So today I actually run the gamut from VHS all the way to Blu-ray with a DVD right in the middle. So we were going to look at a horror film called P2, and then a sci-fi flick called Archenemy, and another horror/thriller called Premonition. So let's not waste any time at all. Let's dive right into episode 2 of Shelf Space. I'll go in these in the reverse order I watched them. So last night I watched this one. This is Archenemy. This is a 2020 film directed by Adam Egypt Mortimer, which just is an awesome name, so kudos to that. But this is a movie that I actually took off my shelf because I didn't think I would ever get around to watching it, so I was actually going to purge it, but I ended up putting it in last night to just give it a watch and see how it was. And this one is very middle of the road for me. It's a very unique premise, but the way it's executed, it leaves a little to be desired. We are following our main character here, played by Joe Manganiello. He plays Max Fist, who, by all accounts, is a local drunkard. However, he claims that he is from another planet called Chromium. That's what it is. He's telling people that he was pulled in through a wormhole and was eventually landed here on Earth. But, of course, nobody believes him. He doesn't have any superpowers, really, or anything like that. But we have our local boy named Hamster. He's in his, I would say, probably in his early 20s, and he's trying to get this job basically as like a social media, I don't even know what the role would be, but kind of a writer, I guess, of some sort. And so he ends up following Max Fist around to try to learn his story and figure, if he's telling the truth or not. Along with that is his sister Iris, who is essentially a drug dealer. She kind of fell into it. It's not something she wants to do, but it's the life that has kind of played out in front of her in order to survive. And so we follow these two characters as they follow Max Fist in his journey to, try to either get back to Chromium. What is Chromium? I keep messing up the name of the planet in my head. But yeah, so that's what we're following here. And this movie does an interesting thing by mixing both animation in with the live action. It is definitely a live action film, but there are moments in here where you get some of that animation, as you can actually see right on the slipcover there. And I thought that was pretty interesting, but I'm honestly not the biggest fan of that when movies do that. I've yet to see a movie that does it really well. And so if you guys know of any, let me know down in the comments below. But I want it to either be an animated film or a live action film rather than doing this mix of them. And because of that, it just makes it feel a little cheap. Like they couldn't get, these bigger moments, they couldn't afford to do them in live action, so they decided to resort to the animation instead. I don't know that that's the case at all. I assume this is a lower budget film given, what I've watched of it and what I know of it. But I don't know why that decision was made, but whatever the reason, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. The story itself is kind of all over the place. It just goes in a lot of different directions. I'm not sure if, Max Fist is really the person I should be caring about or wondering about the most, or if it's these siblings, if they're the kind of the main driving force behind this. And that lack of clarity, I think, really hurts the film. I wanted there to be kind of one direction that it took and just ran with it. And unfortunately, it doesn't really do that. It feels split in its focus. And because of that, it hurts the film a little bit. This is an interesting movie just because it is an indie film and it does something very unique. But that said, I don't think that what it's actually doing is worthwhile. Some of the acting in this is hit or miss, some of it more miss than hit, but actually after this one I watched an Asylum film, which makes this one look like, I watched the Asylum film first and then watched this one afterwards, so I was probably a little more lenient on it because some of the acting in that Asylum film was just terrible. But I think our main character does a good job. The effects work looks, darn good for what it is. It's just the story. I just didn't really care about the story. We see this character here is Max Fist's ex-wife, or I think it's his ex-wife, and she's kind of there as the titular arch enemy. and I feel like the story is going for something more. There's a larger meaning behind it, but it was honestly kind of lost on me. I was just losing my focus throughout because the movie just didn't entertain me in the way I was hoping it would. So for my money, this one just, I can't recommend it. I am going to give Archenemy from 2020 2.5 out of 5 stars. And is it worth the shelf space? Well, unfortunately, no, it's not for me. So pulling it off the shelf and adding it to that Purge pile was the correct choice to make. But yeah, this one is probably available streaming somewhere, I would imagine, if you're interested. But for my money, I don't think seeking out this Blu-ray is worthwhile. I'll move over to the VHS tape I watched next. This is called Premonition on the box here, but if you look this up on IMDb, it goes under the title Convergence from 1999, and this is directed by Gavin Wilding. That name wasn't familiar to me, but he also directed another film in my collection called Christina's House, which is another horror thriller. And that one I think was a little bit more popular, so that might be why you are familiar with him. But either way, with this one, I actually won this on a Whatnot giveaway, and the reason I was interested is because it stars Christopher Lloyd, and he is genuinely one of the stars of this film. It's not one of those little cameos, but he plays this seasoned reporter who tries to get kind of weird stories. It almost felt like he worked for almost like a TMZ style, kind of an exploitation news outlet is what it felt like to me. At least that's kind of what his role was, because he was working with this other woman who was partnered up with him in order to research this case of this patient at an insane asylum who predicts people's deaths. At least, you know, that's the story. And so they go and they try to figure out if it's real or not and what's going on. But then from there, weird things start to happen. I've heard this described as almost like a Final Destination style film. And I understand kind of where that comparison comes from, but that's just, it's not doing Final Destination justice at all, because this movie is nothing compared to Final Destination. This was another one. I just found this extremely difficult to get into. I watched this over the course of a few different nights just because I either fell asleep or I had to, move on to do something else. But boy, this is just not a good film. The acting, I think, is fine, but Christopher Lloyd's character is utterly boring. He is one note, playing the exact same emotion throughout the entire film, which is just kind of this old, disgruntled reporter. That's his entire character. And it doesn't make for fun viewing whatsoever. The other character's name is Allie Kane, played by Cynthia Preston, who I don't recognize, but I thought she did a good enough job for what she was tasked with. But again, the script it's not really doing much at all. And how things kind of tie together as the movie progresses made very little sense to me whatsoever. This one was just, frankly, a waste of 90 minutes. I didn't like this at all. I cannot recommend it. Frank, I just have nothing else to say about it. It's not a well done film. You do get some of that almost, and this is kind of what it felt like, was like a late night Skinamax style movie. You get very, very little of that here. So you're not even getting the good bits of a Skinamax film. You're just getting the bad parts. This is not a good film. This one, okay, so I'll wrap it up there, I guess. Premonition from 1999, I am going to give 1 out of 5 stars, and this absolutely is not worth the shelf space. So another one that's going to be purged from the collection. So let's end things here on a high note. So I was recently watching an older video from Brian over at The Horror Punk here on YouTube, who I definitely recommend his channel. He's awesome, does a ton of hauls. So if you like what I do here, you'll definitely like what he does. But he has a very keen eye for indie horror films. And one of those he was talking about in his video of movies that were stuck on DVD that deserved a Blu-ray upgrade was this one here called P2. And that's when that reminded me that I've had this in my collection for a long time. I've known about it even longer than that, but I've never sat down to watch it. So I think in his video, I put in the comments that I was going to make this a priority this week. Well, that night I sat down and I put this movie on. and I'm so glad I did. Actually, this is a Christmas film, so if you want to watch it around Christmas, you can go that route. But with P2, we are following our main actress here. She is working late on Christmas Eve, and so she is one of the very few people left in this big building that she works in New York City. So she goes down to her car finally. She's running late for a party with her nieces and nephews and whatnot. So she runs down to her car, and her car won't start. There's kind of a series of unfortunate events that take place, and anyway, it ends up with her being captured and trapped in this parking structure with the security guard, which is not a spoiler at all. This is not a slasher like whodunit film at all. Look at the back of the box. It's very obvious what's going on here. This is a film where you know who the bad guy is, you know who the good guy is, and you're simply trying to see how and will this person escape alive. And I utterly loved this film. I had no idea, and I probably would have watched it sooner if I realized this, but this was co-written and co-produced by Alexander Aja, who of course is known for High Tension, The Hills Have Eyes remake, and so much more. But he is known for brutal, very brutal horror films, and this one definitely falls into that category. This is a bloody, gory film that is so much fun to watch. Sure, the situations that she finds herself in are ridiculous at points, and you might say, well, why don't you do this, or why didn't you do that? But the way they set things up, I feel like they did a nice job of kind of answering those questions on why she didn't do X, Y, or Z. And so this was kind of her path of least resistance, or the path that made the most sense, you know, for the character at the time. And so that part never bothered me at all. I didn't really, you know, it's one of those where if you suspend your disbelief and you're just going with the film because you're enjoying it, then you're going to have a great time with this, which is exactly what I did here. I thought the acting on this was great, especially our main actress, who I do know from, she also was in the Inside remake, which is a terrible movie, not because of her necessarily, but it's just a terrible film, especially when you compare it to the incredible original film. But speaking of horror movies that are extremely brutal and gory, but yeah, so our main actress is great. Our main actor, Wes Bentley, he's fantastic in this as well. There's almost a comedic side to this whole thing, which is crazy when you mix in the gore. It's very much a black comedy at points, but really, it felt more just as a straight horror film to me than a black comedy. But there are those kind of comedic elements at various points, which I thought worked really well. This is exactly the type of film I love. It is a product of that torture era, which I am a child of, right? Like, I was in high school when that era kicked off with films like Saw and Hostel, and this is exactly from that era. This is from 2007. I love this era of filmmaking, from the, you know, of horror filmmaking, I should say, and I think this is just so much better than I ever could have expected it to be. I would love to upgrade this one to a boutique 4K or Blu-ray release down the line, but in the meantime, the DVD looked totally fine, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. There's actually an audio commentary on here as well with the director, and I listened to some of that, and that was fun to watch through as well. Like, this is just an awesome film. I cannot recommend this enough. Best yet, from my research, I believe this is available on Tubi right now to watch for free. So if you're questioning if this is one that you want to seek out, maybe watch it there first. But for my money, I am giving P2 from 2007 4 out of 5 stars, and this is absolutely worthy of the space it's taking up on my shelf. So that is episode 2, and I think I mentioned it back in the first episode, but I want to keep a running tally of my results as I'm watching through these movies. So hopefully you're seeing some type of Excel spreadsheet or something that's giving you the up-to-date stats. But in this video, much like the first one, we went with a 33% success rate, as I am keeping one of these and 2 of them are being purged from the collection with Archenemy and Premonition. If you've not seen P2, again, I can't recommend it enough. It is exactly my type of horror film. I loved it. But anyway, I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments below. Have you seen any of these 3 films? And if so, what did you think about them? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Talk about anything down there. That's totally fine. If you see movies on my shelf that you think would make a good episode of Shelf Space, let me know down in the comments as well. But I want to say thank you guys for the awesome reaction reaction on the first video that really encouraged me to kind of do more of these. So looking forward to getting through this as I go. I have no idea, there's no cadence to this series at all. It's just whenever I watch 3 movies that fit this theme of shelf space, then I'll film a video. So anyway, let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on this and anything else. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Before you go, if you could hit that like button down there, that engagement really does help me out. And with that said, guys, thanks again for checking out Shelf Space Episode 2. I'll encourage you all, before you go, to consume some media today. I'll catch you next time.